This is Matthew Cratter from Trade University, and today I want to answer the question, will Ordinals destroy Bitcoin? What we're going to be talking about is NFTs and similar things actually coming to the Bitcoin blockchain. So there are two strong traditions in Bitcoin culture. The first one is don't shovel unrelated crap into the Bitcoin blockchain. Try to keep the blockchain as small as possible to make it easier for everyone in the world to run a node, to run a Bitcoin node, which helps to keep Bitcoin decentralized. If the blockchain is really large, then it may not be as accessible to people, for example, in developing countries who don't have the bandwidth or storage to download the whole blockchain, and that detracts from decentralization. So that's the first strong tradition. Don't shovel unrelated crap into the Bitcoin blockchain. The second strong tradition is this cypherpunk libertarian tradition, which is basically allow everyone to use Bitcoin as they see fit. Don't tell them what to do. It's an open and permissionless system. And as long as they're following the consensus rules, which of course you can't violate because then your block will be rejected, but as long as they're following the consensus rules, they can use Bitcoin however they want. So how do we reconcile these two strong traditions? The first tradition actually goes back as early as December of 2010. We can see here on the Bitcoin Talk forum that there was actually a poll that was taken, question, how do you feel about adding extras to the Bitcoin blockchain? And the vast majority of people, 66%, in other words, 2/3, said that nothing extra should be added to the Bitcoin blockchain. Again, there are not a whole lot of votes here. There's 40 or something votes. Here is the summary from Genjix, who has a legendary rating for all of his activity. Please don't shovel unrelated crap into Bitcoin. Again, remember, this is 2010. This is how early this debate goes. Please don't shovel unrelated crap into Bitcoin. Bitcoin is for money. A lot of us are investing considerable time, money, and energy into Bitcoin-related services. There's talk on these forums of embedding DNS, files, food. Bitcoin should focus on money. By including all these extras in here, you will scare off others. Focus on one thing and do it well. I don't want the code base to become bloated, be debased with all these extras that may not work and just use up our energy. So that's a very old tradition, this tradition of saying don't put a lot of unrelated stuff onto the blockchain. He's alluding here to BitDNS, which was this project that wanted to extend Bitcoin's technology to domain name services, DNS. As it says here, expanding the software to support transactions for registering, updating, and transferring domains. This project eventually became an altchain with its own altcoin known as Namecoin. So this was something that Satoshi was not in favor of, putting everything on the Bitcoin blockchain. Here's Satoshi's post from December. It's part of the same, December of 2010, part of the same discussion about BitDNS. And Satoshi wrote, I think it would be possible for BitDNS to be a completely separate network and separate blockchain, yet share CPU power with Bitcoin. The only overlap is to make it so miners can search for proof of work for both networks simultaneously. And we've seen similar proposals for sort of side chains and mining, etc. Now here's the summary from this discussion from Satoshi as well. Piling every proof of work quorum system in the world into one data set, in other words, the Bitcoin blockchain, doesn't scale. And how true this is. Bitcoin and BitDNS can be used separately. Users shouldn't have to download all of both to use one or the other. So this is Satoshi's opinion. Again, the project has long since left his control and direction, and we don't necessarily need to do everything that he says. And in fact, we don't really know what he would do in 2023. We might be able to extrapolate from what he would say in 2010. So we don't necessarily have to follow him, but I think that he does have a certain authority, and hearing and seeing how these early debates played out can inform the decisions we make today about Bitcoin. And again, we don't have to follow Satoshi in a dogmatic way, but these general principles, such as the principle of blockchain bloat and trying to avoid it, I think are quite interesting. Now, this controversy was something I predicted actually in April of 2022. I made this video called How Bitcoin Destroys All Altcoins, talking about the Taproot and Taro upgrades. And I mentioned in the description notes, if this was back in April of 2022, Taro, maybe I should have said Taproot, will allow stablecoins, NFTs, wrapped altcoins, and other assets to be issued on the Bitcoin blockchain and then moved incredibly quickly and cheaply over the Lightning Network. Well, that day is now here. It was announced on January 20th, 2023 by Casey Rodarmor. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name correctly. He used to be a Bitcoin Core dev, so he knows the project quite well. And he's come up with something called Ordinals and inscriptions. Inscriptions are finally ready for Bitcoin mainnet. Inscriptions are like NFTs, but are true digital artifacts. In other words, true digital assets. Decentralized, immutable, always on chain on the Bitcoin blockchain, and native to Bitcoin. There's been a lot of controversy about this in the last couple of days, and you've been asking me for my preliminary thoughts on this, which I'm going to provide now. We can see the headlines: Ordinals launches NFTs on Bitcoin, unsurprisingly sparking controversy. So what are Ordinals? Ordinals is basically a numbering scheme for individual sats, for individual Satoshis, that is based on the order in which they are mined and sent. And I don't understand the exact details of that, but there's roughly an order to all of the Satoshis, or there's this order that's imposed on them, a numbering scheme. As a reminder, one Bitcoin is comprised of 100 million sats, and it's actually sats or Satoshis that are the native token on the Bitcoin network, as I understand it in the code. So an inscription is basically you can connect an asset to each of these individual Satoshis, and then you can send the Satoshis around the Bitcoin network, and I believe you can send it on Lightning as well, and that asset will come along with it. So unlike NFTs, for example, on Solana or Ethereum or these other blockchains, which are based, as I understand it, on hash barcodes on the blockchain that point to a file that is stored elsewhere, that's stored on someone else's server, maybe on a cloud server. With Ordinals and with inscriptions, you can actually store text and images directly on the Bitcoin blockchain, which is pretty cool. You have everything all there together, unlike with NFTs, where if, for example, OpenSeas or one of these hosting services goes down, your NFT could disappear, even though there's an inscription on the Ethereum blockchain that says you have a right to it and that you can prove that cryptographically. So this is a very, very different, where the NFTs, for example, would be stored directly on the Bitcoin blockchain. In other words, these are actual files. They're not just pointers or links. Now, it's important to remember when talking about the Bitcoin blockchain that if you are bullish on Bitcoin, as I am, you believe that the Bitcoin blockchain will be around forever. And so we have to think very long term. The problem with ordinals and inscriptions and NFTs on Bitcoin is now everyone who wants to run a full node has to download the Bitcoin blockchain that now includes your silly JPEG that has nothing to do with global neutral money. And anyone who wants to send these ordinals around the Bitcoin network using a transaction is now competing for block space with traditional Bitcoin financial transactions of the kind that we all know. So this could cause transaction fees to rise as different kinds of users compete for scarce block space. You have the ordinal transactions or the inscription transactions, and then you have the traditional financial transactions on Bitcoin. If you're finding this video helpful so far, I just ask you to hit the like button, the subscribe button, especially if you haven't subscribed to this channel already, and leave a comment in the comment section below. Here's the extreme version of this particular critique of ordinals and inscriptions. This is from Bitcoin is Saving. Marginalized peoples in developing countries will have to pay more to run their Bitcoin nodes and send transactions, simply because the Bitcoin blockchain will be larger, for example, and there'll be competition for block space in terms of sending transactions. Marginalized people will have to pay more because privileged wealthy whites want to put JPEG drawings on the blockchain as status symbols. Just because you can doesn't mean that you should. I'm going to link here to the Ordinal Theory Handbook if you want to go a little bit deeper into how it works. But here's a very good summary. Individual sats can be inscribed with arbitrary content, creating unique Bitcoin native digital artifacts that can be held in Bitcoin wallets and transferred using Bitcoin transactions. Inscriptions are as durable, immutable, secure, and decentralized as Bitcoin itself, because they actually are on the Bitcoin blockchain. You can see here some examples of subscriptions. You can always you can see the blocks that they're in, etc. So what are some good things about this? Good things about the Ordinals project: there's no scammy token required. They did not issue another token like Ethereum or Solana or something like this. It uses Bitcoin. It uses Satoshis. Another good thing: there's no sidechain. Everything is Bitcoin native because it's on the Bitcoin blockchain and it's using the same native asset of the Bitcoin blockchain, which is Satoshis or Bitcoin. Also, we no longer get teased for not having NFTs. I think this is a very, very minor benefit, but this is no longer a critique of Bitcoin that you can't do various things like NFTs on it if you actually care about NFTs, which I do not. that much. Another good thing about the Ordinals project that is is a sword that cuts both ways, that slices both ways, is that Bitcoin miners get paid transaction fees for sending these ordinals around, these ordinal transactions, because again, you're sending individual Satoshis around. If a block is not already full of traditional Bitcoin financial transactions, then including some ordinal or inscription transactions in the block is not necessarily a bad thing, leaving aside, of course, the question of blockchain bloat. This, in fact, is a clever way of subsidizing the Bitcoin miner, especially in a low-fee environment. So if the block's not already going to be full of regular Bitcoin transactions, then you're basically creating more revenue for the miners, which is ultimately good for Bitcoin security. The problem is, though, if there are already enough waiting financial transactions in the mempool, in the waiting room, that are waiting to be confirmed, and if there are already enough of those transactions to completely fill up the next block and maybe the next block after that, it's a bit annoying to see NFTs or similar inscriptions competing for precious block space. So in the case where the block is not already full, you're basically filling the block up and it's good for the miner. But if the block is already going to be full, then you are creating competition. And if someone in a third world country or developing country is trying to send an important Bitcoin transaction that will avoid censorship, that will avoid them having to deal with a bank, and it's competing for transaction fees with a monkey JPEG from someone in California or Colorado, then you can see how this might be, people might get a little bit upset by it. So those are some of the good things about the Ordinals project and some of the downsides. A neutral thing I could say about Ordinals is that it was inevitable anyway once the 2021 Taproot soft fork took place. And so if Casey Rodarmor hadn't done it, someone else definitely would have. Now, what are some bad things about the Ordinals project? NFTs and other inscriptions, as we've said, are simply not as interesting or important, at least in my opinion, as bringing fair, neutral money to 8 billion people. Hopefully this is obvious to most people. Inscriptions take up precious space on the blockchain. When I download the Bitcoin blockchain to my laptop or Raspberry Pi in order to run a node, why should I have to download unnecessary junk like NFTs and other inscriptions? And the quality of NFT art is still very, very low, especially when you compare it to what you might see in a traditional art gallery. So this is another problem. A lot of NFT art is really fiat art, and it's not quite as beautiful as what the kind of art we had during when society and culture was on a gold standard or a sound money standard. What if someone uploads something really toxic? Here's where things get very, very dicey. What if someone uploads something really toxic like child porn to the Bitcoin blockchain using ordinals and inscriptions? This could give regulators a reason to arrest anyone running a full node who has the blockchain on their computer. My understanding is that there are porn URLs already on the Bitcoin blockchain. Some of these go back to 2013 or 2014, where you had some sort of smart alecky devs who wanted to see if they could do this, and it's a little bit of a challenge. But there are no actual JPEGs, is my understanding, at least until now. That's a big difference. And so you could say that if bad images start to show up on the Bitcoin blockchain now, that could be a bad thing. Of course, we're all going to get arrested anyway at some point for running Bitcoin nodes if things get bad, whether there's porn, child porn, or adult porn on the Bitcoin blockchain. But this is something that definitely gives me pause if this sort of stuff ends up on the Bitcoin blockchain. And if something can be done, unfortunately, it usually will be done. There's a subtle argument that some people have been making using this in favor of ordinals and inscriptions, basically arguing that if the Bitcoin blockchain contains not just financial transactions, but also messages and texts and pictures and NFTs, then it becomes easier to protect the Bitcoin blockchain itself, that file, under free speech laws, especially in places like the US. Of course, Bitcoin Core, the software and the rules, is already protected as free speech, as software code in the US, but it's unclear whether the blockchain itself would be, the ledger itself, if you want to distinguish between Bitcoin Core and then the blockchain itself. And I'm not sure exactly how that works in practice because I'm not a developer. But this argument is basically you stick a lot of other stuff on the blockchain and it becomes a repository of text and it becomes free speech. The response to this would be that child pornography is not protected as free speech as far as I know in the US, and it certainly should not be. So if it's unloaded as an NFT, that will be really bad. I should make a side note here just to make things really, really clear for the algorithm and for anyone who may be watching this. I have kids. Child porn is vile and disgusting. So I don't want anyone to interpret anything that I say here as some sort of support for child porn in any way, shape, or form. I'm against it, and it's disgusting. I'm not trying to argue that it should be included as free speech, just to make that completely clear. It just takes one instance of child porn on the blockchain to corrupt the whole thing in the eyes of the law. And of course, as this always is, this will be selectively enforced to jail people that they already want to jail for other reasons. So if you're a Bitcoiner that they don't like and they want to put you in jail, they could go to your house, take your Bitcoin node and show that there's child porn on it that's in the blockchain and put you in jail. Again, this is not something practical to do to 10 million Bitcoiners or 40 million Bitcoiners or a billion Bitcoiners, but it is a little bit disturbing if this stuff makes its way onto the Bitcoin blockchain. As we've seen over the past couple of years, NFTs have already firmly ensconced themselves on Ethereum, on Solana, on Polygon, on these other chains, and that's really where all the buyers and sellers of NFTs are. Network effects matter. The buyers want to be where the sellers are, where the most sellers are, and sellers want to be where the most buyers are, in the same way that eBay worked, for example. It's quite unlikely that NFTs and other inscriptions built using ordinals will end up being used much on Bitcoin once the initial excitement wears off. And I think this is just because I don't know any Bitcoiners who are really into NFTs. They must exist, but I don't know any. And there's this opportunity cost, if you really understand how valuable Bitcoin is. There's an opportunity cost to buying an NFT when you could have bought Bitcoin instead. Now, Bitcoin, as we said at the beginning of this video, is an open protocol. We should let people do what they want. But we should keep in mind simultaneously sort of hold these two traditions in our mind at the same time. Bitcoin's financial uses are a much bigger total addressable market, TAM, and will win the day. Global neutral money is much more important than JPEGs and other inscriptions. As we said, if a government wants to put an individual Bitcoiner in jail, they can always cook up a fake reason to do it, whether or not bad things like child porn exist on the Bitcoin blockchain that is being stored on that person's computer. You can try banning NFTs from Bitcoin, but if people, and here's the thing, if people really want to put them on there and pay the fees, they will find a way to do it anyway. And we've already seen over the past 14 years, various people embedding stuff on the Bitcoin blockchain, either in, I believe, in op return codes and saying, happy birthday, Eleanor, and these sort of messages on there. So people are doing this a little bit already, though they're not actual images as far as I can tell, or actual JPEGs on the Bitcoin blockchain until inscriptions and ordinals came along. So if people really want to do something, they're going to do it. So we might as well just let them do it. People who want to store NFTs and other inscriptions on the Bitcoin blockchain and move it around using Lightning or the base layer will eventually be priced out by much better financial uses, in my opinion, as Bitcoin becomes a global final settlement network, financial network that's used to settle large transactions. Monkey JPEGs and Pepes are not going to be able to compete. NFTs already seem to like to migrate to blockchains with cheaper transaction fees. So they started off, as I understand it, on Ethereum. And then when Ethereum fees became very high, where in many cases you were paying more for the fee, the Ethereum transaction fee, than you were for the NFT, then you saw this migration to Solana and Polygon and some other chains. So if the Bitcoin blockchain really takes off as we expect it to and gets used mainly for financial usages, it will push out anyone who wants to play silly games with NFTs on it. A final note, Bitcoin miners have a perfect right not to include NFTs, any other inscriptions, or really any transactions in any blocks that they mine. Yes, this is censorship, but anything is allowed with Bitcoin. You're allowed as a Bitcoin miner to choose either what you do or what your mining pool does. Often these decisions are now made at the level of the Bitcoin mining pool, but you get the general idea that you could have, for example, a Bitcoin mining pool that decides not to include any ordinals or inscriptions. This is censorship, but anything is allowed with Bitcoin. And no one is obliged, the flip side of this is no one is obliged to include what they believe is junk in a block as a Bitcoin miner. Unfortunately, if it's in the Bitcoin blockchain and you're running a node, you're going to have to download it because it's part of the blockchain, as I understand it. Some miners will censor inscriptions and refuse to include these transactions for ideological reasons. I would say for pretty good ideological reasons. Some miners will just be economic or financial actors and will include the inscriptions, especially if they are attached to a juicy transaction fee, and that's fine as well. If you believe in Bitcoin's fundamental global mission to provide neutral money to 8 billion people, you will not be putting any of your own inscriptions on the chain and contributing to blockchain bloat. That's my opinion. I would ask people to show some reverence for the Bitcoin blockchain, unless you're one of those people who think that this looks good. So this doesn't necessarily kill the tree, as long as you don't carve it too deeply and harm the xylem and phloem of the tree. But this is quite ugly to see a beautiful natural tree, and to see graffiti, and to see carving, etc. And I'm sorry, but these inscriptions and ordinals, they remind me a little bit of graffiti on a beautiful natural object. So just because you can do something doesn't necessarily mean that you should do it. That being said, Bitcoin is an open permissionless system, and so if idiots want to carve their name on a tree, and their relationship's probably not even going to last. I doubt that Nick and Deb here from 1996 are still together. You can go ahead and do it. But I think I personally am not interested in putting vanity NFTs or anything on the Bitcoin blockchain. I'd rather not contribute to Bitcoin blockchain bloat. If you found this video helpful, be sure to hit that subscribe and like buttons. Hit the notification bell if you want to be notified when I publish my next video. And let me know your questions and comments in the comment section below. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.